Hey everybody, this is Mark. Welcome back to Beyond Profit, a Global Perspective, and today we're going to be talking about manufacturing. Now, I say manufacturing, some of you are like, not interested in that, but I think you should be interested in it because we're going to answer some big important questions. One is, does the United States actually make anything anymore? Second, if they do or don't, does it actually matter? And third, what about the workers? What about the people who work the jobs, the laborers, right? Shouldn't we care about them? So without any further delay, let's get into it. So hey everybody, I wanted to remind you to please like this video if you like it, of course. Subscribe if you're really getting a lot out of these videos and you really are enjoying it, appreciating it. That's great. Share it with others. You know, I'm all about trying to share this information. This is a lot of stuff that I teach students in classes, and I think it might be beneficial to a lot of people. So if it helps you, that's awesome. Let people know more about it. I also want to invite you, if you're interested in learning from me. I work at the University of St. Mary. It's a great program. I lead and teach in an MBA program, and I'd be happy to work with you if you want to come and learn at the University of St. Mary. All right, so we're going to talk about manufacturing, but a few things that I want to say before we get into it. First of all, I'm going to share a lot of information that is dated. That is, like right now when I'm making this video, this information is current, this information is accurate. A lot of things change over time. So if this video is still sitting here 10 years from now and you're looking at it and you're wondering, just go and research, right? Do your work, do your homework, and make sure that what I'm saying here is still accurate, because a lot of things can change. I will say, however, that I have some videos that are on YouTube that are well over 10 years old, and the information hasn't changed that much. Sure, the numbers have changed a little bit here and there, but the general big story is still the same. So a lot of times I think about, should I redo videos? Should I remake them? And I generally do if there's something that's just completely wrong. One thing that I've discovered over time, though, is when we're talking about labor, is that things unfortunately don't change all that much. And so even though the specifics might be different, the big story probably is fairly similar. So that's one thing that I want to sort of just offer as a disclaimer, right? The second thing is, I am going to be sharing a lot of data. There's going to be some charts and slides and things like that, a lot of which I took from various sources around the internet. I'm going to do my best to credit those people and to really do service to the work that they've done. Clearly, I've written books, I've done some research on different things, like I am a social scientist as well as a teacher, but there are hundreds, thousands, maybe millions of people who have put together all of this information, and I'm its beneficiary. So I just want to credit those people who really provide the solid information that I'm just getting to deliver. So without further delay, let's get into this talk about manufacturing. What I want to do is talk about, and this is where we talk a little bit more about labor. We've already been kind of dancing around the subject, because when we're talking about, tariffs, when we're talking about subsidies, these forms of protectionism, there's an element of labor that's involved, and that is how do we handle a situation where there are people who may be dependent on an industry? We are to some extent thinking about who those workers are, what the impact might be on them and their community and everything else. So the next step is to talk about labor in manufacturing. So U.S. manufacturing. I have heard this from so many political commentators over recent years, and that is, the United States doesn't make anything anymore. Is this true? Broadly speaking, we are doing more services than we certainly have in the past. Take your typical iPhone, some of the parts do originate in America. Lots of the other parts come from elsewhere. It may be assembled, more likely to be assembled in China. Yeah, there are a lot of products that used to be made in the United States and have gone elsewhere to be made, right? So like, we don't make Etch-a-Sketches anymore, right? China makes the Etch-a-Sketches. They're not produced here anymore. Pretty much everything that's a consumer product that you find in Walmart is not going to be made in America. But there's other stuff that is made in America, so what are those products, right? But then my next question is this: what do you think contributes to make a country attractive for manufacturing? That a common answer to this does have to do with labor costs. So I want to address both sides of that, right? Do we make anything, and what role does labor costs play in all of this? So let's first look at the whole economy. So this is what share each country has in terms of the global economy. So the United States is the biggest economy in the world with a $26.9 trillion economy. This is 2023 numbers, so it's the latest ones I could get. China, 19.4. So these two were clearly the two biggest in the world. The United States still pretty substantially larger than China, but China still being pretty big. What's interesting is the relative size of everybody else being somewhat smaller, although that's also somewhat relative. Like you have Europe over here, which occupies a really, really big chunk of the economy. And if you looked at just at EU countries, for example, that would probably be, number 2 or number 3. Like that's a huge chunk if you just look at that collective trading block altogether. So America's huge in terms of the world economy, and still is. So to think that we're not dominant, that we're not doing well economically, is a farce. Top global manufacturing destinations. Number 1 is China, and this is a little data, 2021. 2 is India, but 3 is the USA. So if 3 is the USA, do you think that labor costs have so much to do with choices in manufacturing? Are you surprised that we're number 3? We're number 3. Technology does help if you're producing products that are highly reliant on technology, absolutely. I will say that if you look at raw productivity numbers, American workers are the most productive in the world. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they're across the board productive at everything they do. And so what you're saying still might make sense, that they might, there are some industries that it may not be best we specialize in. And maybe we aren't so productive in those particular industries. Like I said, I'm going to give you a lot of numbers that I think you're going to find interesting. So global share of manufacturing. China is number 1 with 28.5%. The United States is number 2 with 17.34%, and everybody else is in our wake. Is that surprising? To those who say we don't make anything anymore, I mean, we're number 2. We're not number 1, but hey, this is pretty significant. It's a great political talking point, right? If you want to get people riled up and make people think that we're not living up to our potential in some way, then yeah, we can carry on a myth about the way things seem to be based on the fact we go into Walmart, we don't see a bunch of stuff that's made in America, when the actuality is that we're very, very productive in terms of manufacturing. We don't see it, and politicians are always telling us otherwise because their advantage will lie to us. I say lie? I don't know. Stretch the truth, gets hyped up, I don't know. You'll see that we do more service than we do manufacturing. I mean, that's not wrong. But to say that we're doing horrible in manufacturing isn't true either, right? And so let's look a little closer at these numbers, and it'll kind of paint a picture, I think, of what we're talking about here. So this is a measure of how much value manufacturing adds to the economy. So manufacturing comprises a huge portion of the U.S. economy. 2.2 trillion, I'm thinking that is. Really important to Japan, really important to Germany. It's a huge part of their economy, and just in terms of its value. Now, here's some examples of things that we make in the United States. In Kansas, these are the top exports. So in Kansas and Oklahoma, Arkansas, aircraft. These are number 1 export. You'd think it'd be like some agricultural product, but it's not. Washington, in fact, we used to have Boeing. We used to have a bunch of this stuff that moved up to Washington State. All this stuff used to be in Kansas. You don't think about this stuff being made in America because you're not going through a store and looking at aircraft, right? But we make some really expensive stuff here in this country, some really high-tech stuff. And, we're not selling a gazillion pens, we're selling thousands of planes. So it's different, right? So Nebraska and Colorado, you've got cow meat. Idaho, semiconductors. Oregon, electrical processors. Vehicles in California and in Missouri, right? Raw materials, light oils in Minnesota, North Dakota, petroleum in Texas. We could go through, but like there's lots of stuff. Medicine in Pennsylvania, all kinds of things. Diamonds, yeah, New York. Do we need strong manufacturing in order to maintain global economic dominance? Is that necessary for a country? So there has been a global decline in manufacturing, okay? Not just in the United States. So like if you're looking at the United States, actually, it's the blue line. It's gone from like 19% in the mid-1980s to about 11.2%, so that's a decline. But the decline really isn't as substantial, say, as like China's decline, which was like 40% of their GDP, down to 27.2% in 2019. China's GDP would have been a lot smaller in 1980 than it is today, of course. So it's not perfect. The countries that have the best access to leading edge technology tend to dominate the economy. So, you know, in the 20th century, it was automobiles. Like if you were manufacturing automobiles and you were on top, then you were going to have the best economy. And that was pretty true of the United States through the 20th century. It was cars really that built American dominance in the 20th century, right? As we move on to computers, to cell phones, to internet, and all this other sort of stuff, right? Other forms of processing, all of this sort of stuff. Those are the kinds of things where if you have access to those, then yeah, you're going to have the bigger economy, and it's probably going to mean that you're more powerful. It doesn't necessarily mean manufacturing in general, but yes, probably access to certain technologies and the ability to produce those, probably important. If you have a look, though, in terms of the stuff that the United States is making, right, it is making that high-end stuff. It may not be making the same proportion as some other countries, like, you know, some of the Northern European countries really do great at cell phones, right? We get a lot of imports on those. But we're in the right territory as far as that goes. Does it matter that we have a more diversified economy with 11% of our economy in manufacturing versus China with 27%? Are there any problems with that? Maybe when you're thinking about economics, there's things you want to specialize in, as the liberals will suggest through comparative advantage, but maybe you also want a diversified portfolio because it might help from both economic and security standpoints. We don't rely as much on manufacturing as a percentage of our economy. We can make just as much stuff, right? But it doesn't necessarily mean that it is as big of a deal to us anymore, right? In fact, that's what I would argue, is that our absolute numbers are still quite high, but there's just a lot more value added in a lot of other places. There has been a transition toward a more service-oriented economy, where there's been more of a demand for jobs that are non-manufacturing. So, in real numbers, even though market share dropped, 2016 had the highest numbers for US manufacturing ever in real terms. In 2018, we had a bigger year for manufacturing. Global market share was still number 2 behind China. Japan's manufacturing at number 3 was less than half of ours. By late 2019, we had one of the worst years ever for manufacturing. I didn't have that on a chart, so I couldn't show you the table. What do you think drove the decline in US manufacturing from 2018 to 2019? Tariffs. Absolutely. So yeah, I mean, we could have had a really, really big year in manufacturing. You know, we were sort of on this upward trajectory, but then once those tariffs started kicking in, our manufacturing output went down significantly. And it's not just based on our policies, it's based on trade war, right? It's the fact that not just what we did, but what other people did to us. So, trade wars, yeah. This is a chart of the manufacturing as a percentage of all US employment. This is what I'm talking about. So, in 1940, 40% of the US economy, that is, not of the US economy, 40% of employment was in manufacturing. And by 2020, 2021, wherever that ends, you know, it's hovering just below 10. We employ 10.94% of the workforce in manufacturing. 10.7% of our economy is comprised of manufacturing as of 2021, and that number seemingly stabilized since then. This is the picture of what's happened in terms of employment prospect. This is probably a big reason why so many people think we don't make anything anymore, because you don't know as many people who are manufacturing stuff anymore either. I mean, honestly, the technology's gotten a whole lot better, right? So you honestly don't need as many workers to produce the same level of manufacturing as you used to. So there's still a problem there, but the problem isn't that we're manufacturing less. The problem is we're employing fewer people in those sectors, and those were jobs that were accessible to certain people who maybe didn't have the highest level of education, and you could get a good job doing it. So that's really the bigger problem. We've been talking about price of labor possibly driving outsourcing, or where you manufacture, what makes it desirable. Do lower wages drive outsourcing? I think we could all argue generally yes. I mean, that's certainly one aspect to it, but it's more complicated than that. What really matters isn't wage rates alone, but unit labor costs. So let me run you through the example here. So how many hours does it take to make a table? I'm not going to run equations here, but you'll get the logic, right? If the United States can make it in a half hour using higher wage employees, you'll do it. If in China it takes 3 workers working all day, it might not be worth it. Probably still cheaper made in the United States. So you have to factor in the technology, the productivity of the worker, the other costs, right? And if it ends up being less efficient by the time you get down with that ledger sheet, and sometimes it's not worth moving it one place or another. And of course, I'm not even taking into account transaction costs, right? Why would I pick up and move a factory or stop using the factory that I've got if there's money to be poured in to pull off that move? Another example, a Romanian company makes cheap Angora sweaters but can't compete with expensive Italian employees. Why? Angora is expensive, and if the machines break down, they lose a lot, costs a lot to get the people to fix the machines. In Italy, the workers know when the machine is about to break, they shut it down and have a close and inexpensive tech support. So in this case, there are things like, infrastructure, technology differences that make it more challenging to do the same thing in Romania as you do in Italy, even though the Italian workers are a whole lot more expensive than the Romanian workers. So I'm not saying that that's true all of the time, but what I'm saying is that you can't just say, let's go to wherever the labor's cheapest, because there's more to it than just the labor itself. Germany's wages are higher than US wages, and 21% of their workforce is in manufacturing, at least based on this data here, this report. Denmark and Sweden have higher wages for their manufacturing workers. According to this report, what's different, their workforce is better educated. In the US, about half of Americans get a great education, about half barely get through high school. And so we got to ask ourselves, how can we educate people for a new generation of jobs if we don't do a good job at that K-12 level? And then employers and government in these countries tend to invest much more in their employees, from education to benefits. But based on my research anyway, the German government and many other Northern European countries are much better at providing that kind of education. Like if you're working in a factory, they may cross-train them to do different kinds of manufacturing. So if one plant shuts down, then they can go do a different kind of thing that's in higher demand. If that goes down, then they have the flexibility to move around. And from what I understand, that's one of the factors that has allowed Germany to maintain a higher percentage of its manufacturing capacity, because of the flexibility of workers and their ability to move a little more freely through the economy. Should the United States do more of this kind of thing, right? We have lost a lot of manufacturing due to outsourcing, right? The unit labor costs are just sometimes cheaper elsewhere, right? But they don't necessarily have to be. If you end up doing that kind of cross-training, you may end up with a more flexible workforce. So what are our key takeaways here? Well, first of all, the United States makes things. Contrary to popular belief, contrary to what the politicians may tell you, the United States actually is good at manufacturing. It's among the best manufacturers in the world. And a lot of this is due to the high technology that we have and the kinds of products that we make. No, we don't make all the stuff that you find on a Walmart shelf all of the time, but we do make things that are of great value to many people throughout the world. So that's the first thing. Second, the United States is dominant economically. Having said all that, even though we have great manufacturing and that we're economically very powerful, we do not have high levels of employment in manufacturing. Now, do we need to have more people in manufacturing? Probably not. But there is this remaining issue of what happens when something gets outsourced, or what happens when the industry, the economy changes, and somebody who's been trained in one thing now doesn't have any place to go anymore. That's a more interesting and more serious problem. So I'm not saying that there aren't any problems here. What I'm saying, it's not the problem that a lot of people say there is. And so what we need to do is start looking at what kinds of solutions there need to be for laborers, not just in the United States, but throughout the world. And if we look at other countries, there are perhaps good examples, maybe better examples, of how they've handled that challenge of trying to place labor in the right place. And one of the key solutions to this might be cross-training and greater forms of education, so that jobs don't have to necessarily move elsewhere, but that labor can move freely between factories and industries a little more flexibly than they did before. This question of how labor is treated, and maybe how we ought to treat labor, will be the subject of other videos. In the meantime, I just want to thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.